is a Thursday morning live here on the TV. Of course, my name is Senior Geroh, the host of the show. This is the Thursday's edition of the Sport Desk Show live here on the TV. Wherever you could be watching us live from, I would say thank you so much for being part of the biggest TV in West Nile. Of course, we shall be discussing a number of sporting stories developing as far as the day is concerned. But the biggest one in Uganda is the Chitara has finally been granted the opportunity to host the CAF actual engagements in the Hoima Stadium, and we shall be discussing that with you in a very, very short while. Then Tadeo Longa has finally got a new home. Of course, he will be quitting Vipers. Of course, with Vipers who won for them the South African Premier League last season, and he has already find himself a new home in Kenya with Leopards FC. That's where Tadeo Longa will definitely be going in. Of course, the Vipers have already signed his replacement. Who the player is what we shall be discussing with you in a very, very short while. In there, of course, Liverpool have finally hijacked the deal of Victor Nunes from Osasuna. Of course, the Newcastle United were interested in the player's services. Finally, Liverpool has actually hijacked that deal of Victor Muniz from Osasuna. In there, of course, Team Real Madrid are equally in business. Of course, they have now signed Bernardo Silva on a free transfer from Manchester City. Of course, Bernardo Silva will be signing a 2-year contract with Los Blancos. Those are the stories that we shall be discussing with you in live. Of course, in the World Cup, actually, this morning there were games played, and there were games played yesterday. I'll be previewing for you some of the games that will be coming up in the World Cup today. Who the teams are, I'll be telling you in a very, very short while. In there, of course, let's first begin from home, and we talk actually local sports before we go for some of those international engagements. Of course, our priority is to see that we'll give you the best when it comes to local sports. Of course, local sports is actually what defines us here at Sunrise TV. Of course, in a local sports here in Uganda, Chitara Football Club has finally been granted the opportunity to host their actual CAF engagements here in Uganda. Of course, Chitara, a team that are based in the team that is based currently in Hoima district. Of course, in Shinara region. Of course, they will be playing their games at the Hoima Stadium. Officially, they have been granted the opportunity to host their games at Hoima Stadium, one of the beautiful stadiums built in Uganda. Even Hoima Stadium is one of the beautiful stadiums in the country. Of course, there are a number of stadiums that have been lined up to be under construction in Uganda, the likes of Kibo Stadium, the likes of Nambola. But I can tell you, Hoima Stadium looks far much better compared to Nambola Stadium. So it's going to be one of the beautiful things for this team of Chitara. Of course, they will be playing in what we call the CAF Confederation actually preliminary stages. Of course, in case they go for that, they will be playing the games in the CAF Confederation Cup. Of course, that is the Europa League of Africa, and we shall be seeing how far this team will be going in that perspective. Of course, a number of teams, of course, a number of players in the Western region are in the team of Chitara. The likes of our hub of this world in the team, the likes of Mohamed Saban of this world, they are into that team of Chitara. So it still remains to be seen how Chitara will be making how their progress will be in what we call the CAF engagement. Of course, last season the team also played in the CAF engagements, but apparently the team was ejected so early in the, so it all still remains to be seen whether this team can be in position to have an performance in CAF engagements. Of course, that is where our pride will be in. Of course, it's all Chitara and Vipers who will be having what we call continental engagements here in Uganda. Of course, Chitara won the Stanbic Uganda Cup. Of course, Vipers won the League Cup. Of course, Vipers will be playing in the CAF Champions League. Of course, it's now the Champions League of Africa, what we can call it in that perspective. But Vipers will be representing us that in the preliminary stages. Of course, Chitara will be representing us in what we call the confederation engagement. In case both teams make their way through in the group stages, then definitely they will be playing at the biggest level of African football. That is what I can tell you about it. That, of course, Tadeo Longa will be leaving Vipers very, very soon. Of course, he has already found a new home in Kenya. He has already got himself into contact terms with the AFC Leopard of Kenya. In the, of course, AFC Leopard is one of the most organized teams in Kenya Premier League. They are one of the powerhouses in Kenya, and I can confirm to you that according to NBA Sports, Tadeo Longa will be quitting Vipers final. Of course, he won with the Vipers, a very, very actually historical moment with the Vipers. Of course, he won for them the Tottenham Ghana Premier League. That's something which is very, very huge for him. Of course, Tadeo Longa, the player who plays for Ghana national team, is one of the most experienced players in Uganda, and he was playing for Vipers. With Vipers Football Club, he managed to win for them what we call the Tottenham Ghana Premier League gong, and that is already actually something that he will be adding into his actual accolades. Of course, winning the Tottenham Ghana Premier League is not an easy thing. Of course, he has got that vast experience when it comes to African football, and with Vipers, he has already won himself. That, of course, Tadeo Longa has played for a number of teams here. He has played for APR of Rwanda. He has even equally played for Simba FC of Tanzania. He even went up to this team of Tata of Egypt, and now he will be crossing over to this team of AFC Leopards of Kenya, whereby he will be getting a lot of money. Of course, at AFC Leopards, he'll be signing a 2-year contract with that team. Of course, Tadeo Longa is a much known of his work rate and his experience, not forgetting his actual defensive abilities. Of course, he is very, very good in that. That's Tadeo Longa for you. And Vipers will be making his services a lot. Of course, Vipers already identified a player to come and replace him already. I'm talking about a player in the name of Joel Sherichoji that Vipers have already signed from KCCA to come and replace Tadeo Longa. Of course, Tadeo Longa had a decent season with the Vipers Football Club in the Southern Ghana Premier League, but still remains to be seen how he will be transforming that form into that team of AFC Leopards. Of course, that is where he will be having enough competition at another country. Of course, once players from Uganda leave Uganda Premier League and they go into another continent or another country, it's always very hard for them to acclimatize to the atmosphere in that league, but it still remains to be seen how this player in the name of Tadeo Longa will be actually cementing himself in the team of AFC Leopards of Kenya Premier League. Of course, he has got that sort of vast experience when it comes to continental engagement, so I'm quite sure he will be cementing himself into that team. Of course, that team of AFC Leopards will be vying themselves to having that actually decent form as the games in what we call the CAF engagement. Of course, they will be playing in the CAF engagements also. So it's they were looking for that experience, and they say that Tadeo Longa is the perfect player for them to see that the team also stayed competitive in CAF engagements and in the Kenya Premier League. So we shall be seeing how this player will be cementing himself in that position. Of course, I've already said that Vipers have identified Joel Sherichoji as his replacement, and Joel Sherichoji is already into the books of Vipers Football Club. This is something which is very, very good. I felt it's very, very important for me to let you know about this deal. Of course, games were played in the World Cup yesterday. Of course, we did see in that's actually a key affair. Portugal were held into a 1-1 draw with DR Congo. Of course, England were 2-1 winners of 4-2 winners of Croatia, and then Ghana were 1-0 winners of Panama. Of course, we did see yesterday Colombia were 3-1 winners over Uzbekistan. Of course, these are some of the games that were played yesterday in the World Cup. Of course, in the World Cup today, games will be coming up in the World Cup. In the World Cup today, we shall be seeing a Czech Republic that will be playing against South Africa. Of course, both teams are still winless in the World Cup so far, and this is going to be a cage affair. Switzerland will be playing against Bosnia and Herzegovina. Of course, we shall be seeing Canada that will be playing against Qatar in that perspective. Of course, before I talk about the Portugal DR Congo game, let's first talk about this game that South Africa will be playing against Czech Republic. This is going to be a very, very actually interesting affair. Of course, both teams are not going to be allowing errors in this competition. Of course, both teams are going to be desperate for actually a win to see that the teams that actually will be making their ways into the knockout stage. Of course, the top two that finishes on top of the group will be having actually that nod of going into the next round. Of course, South Africa, after having that actually defeat in the opening game, of course, they have got a number of things to do in this actual game against Czech Republic. Czech Republic is equal still winless in the World Cup so far, so they may want to come into this game with strong feelings. Of course, they wanted to probably have got actually a decent form in the actually next level. Of course, they may want to have what we call a chance of playing in the next level of the 48th team edition of the FIFA Club World Cup. So it still remains to see whether South Africa can be important to surprise the world and probably pick a win over this team of Czech Republic. But I can tell Czech Republic is going to be having what you call a good game against South Africa. So it still remains to be seen. However, this will be important to have. Of course, South Africa had their game against Mexico in the opening game. Of course, they were beaten by Mexico with a huge scoreline in there, and the Czech Republic is not actually an underdog in what you call in world engagement. So this is going to be another tricky one for South Africa. But I'm quite sure Czech Republic will be having a nod of South Africa in that manner. Of course, Portugal yesterday played against DR Congo. Of course, Portugal played out into 1-1 draw, like I said earlier on. And in this game, there was a huge talking point in this game. Of course, Cristiano Ronaldo put himself into huge actual pressure in this game against Portugal. Against this game against DR Congo. Of course, Cristiano Ronaldo, with the pressure that he put himself into, he was not actually a player to talk about in that game. He actually overshadowed himself. Of course, we all know that he is a player who has got a big ego in that team of Portugal. Of course, he is a player who always wants to start games. He's a player who always never wants to be substituted in Portugal's games. But I can tell you, with the pressure that he put himself in with the fact that the other day we did see Messi scored a hat-trick against Algeria. Cristiano Ronaldo also wanted to score more goals to see that he also equals that record of Lionel Messi. Of course, Lionel Messi has already scored a number of goals in the World Cup, around 16 goals so far in the World Cup history, and Cristiano Ronaldo has scored 15 goals. And Cristiano Ronaldo wanted to score more, always he wanted to actually equal that record that Lionel Messi has kind of leveled matters in the World Cup. Actually, to see that he scored a goal against DR Congo yesterday. Of course, DR Congo stayed a little bit stronger defensively. Of course, they went with a back five and playing three in the middle and then playing two strikers. That was one of the beautiful things. Let's give credit to this guy in the names of Sebastian Desabre, the former coach of Uganda Cranes. He was the hero to me. Of course, he kind of mastered the way how Portugal played the game. He stayed this. He kind of addressed his a little bit porous in the middle of the park, but up from the team was actually doing very well. Of course, team DR Congo stayed disciplined in the back line. Of course, the cab actual threats from Rafael Leos of this world, the Bernardo Silva of this world, they were not actually looking that offensive enough in the final third. And Cristiano Ronaldo has been actually tightly marked in that game against DR Congo yesterday, and the biggest thing in that game was the pressure that Cristiano Ronaldo put himself in, just on the fact that Lionel Messi scored a hat-trick against Algeria the other day, and he also wanted to add himself into the squad boat. And they are also big name players who are already making headlines in the World Cup so far. Lionel Messi scored a hat-trick. Haaland actually scored a brace. Then we did see Kylian Mbappe also scored a brace. And Cristiano Ronaldo is the player who never scored in that game yesterday. So that was one of the beautiful things. So he was putting himself into the pressure. That was one of the reasons as to why Portugal never played well against DR Congo. So I expected Cristiano Ronaldo to calm his actual ego down. Of course, we know he is a player who has seen it all in the world history. Of course, age is also catching up very fast with him. I expected Cristiano Ronaldo to stay calm, probably give time for other youngsters to come and probably see that he comes in as an impact player. Not that he starts games for Portugal. If Cristiano Ronaldo could be important to come in as a substitute or as an impact player, you could have seen Portugal beating that team of DR Congo. Of course, we did see a number of players who were actually running behind this guy in the names of Cristiano Ronaldo. Around 4 players were mastering his moves. Around 3 players were mastering his moves. So it was kind of a man-to-mark actual affair for Cristiano Ronaldo in that game against Portugal. Against DR Congo. But I can tell you, DR Congo stayed disciplined. They knew the target. And the last time that the DR Congo was in the World Cup was long ago, and DR Congo spent like 52 years for them to play games in the World Cup. That was a statement, and in that perspective, this team of Portugal in the last 4 European affairs, or in the last 4 world engagements, or is it in the next 4 continental engagements, this team of Portugal failed to to pick wins in the opening games in their group stage games. That's Portugal for you. So those are some of the things that I witnessed in that game, but I can tell you that was one of the beautiful things that I watched in there. Of course, Jan Naves opened the scoring for them in the 6 minutes before this guy in the names of Jan Wissa equalized for them before the break in there, and that was one of the beautiful things. Jan Wissa played very, very well. The likes of Bakambis of this world, they played very well. I can tell you, Team Congo played a beautiful game, and that was the first actual team that in Africa that I've witnessed that still a little bit dismal. Of course, Cape Verde played that kind of game against Spain. DR Congo played that one against Portugal yesterday, and Ivory Coast was equal into the team. And I can tell you, African teams have so far learned a lot of lessons in some of these big stage levels, but I can tell you there has been a huge issue that African teams have been underrated when it comes to this kind of engagements. But I can tell you this time around, African teams have shown a lot of resilience. African teams have shown a lot of composure. African teams have shown a lot of maturity. They have shown a lot of what we call discipline in the big stage level. Now I can tell you, Africa is never underrated. So we are going to be seeing how far our African teams will be going into the World Cup so far. In the, of course, like I told you today, there are games that will be coming up in the World Cup. Of course, Czech Republic will be playing against South Africa. Switzerland will be playing against Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then Canada will be playing against Qatar in that perspective. Of course, in the world of transfers, there's a big one happening at Santiago Bernabeu. Let me begin from Santiago Bernabeu, then I'll be coming to Anfield before I go into some of the rumors that are currently happening in Europe right now. Of course, Bernardo Silva has already signed a 2 years contract with Real Madrid after leaving Manchester City at the end of the season. Of course, he has been darling at Manchester City. Of course, his contract has finally expired at Manchester City, and he said he wants to have a fresh actual talent, and he has already joined Real Madrid on a 2 years contract. Of course, he is still with that team of Portugal in the World Cup engagement, and the 31-year-old Portugal midfielder will be joining Real Madrid after the World Cup games. Of course, at Manchester City, he scored around 76 goals for Manchester City, and provided in total around 77 assists in 451 games that he played for Manchester City, and he finally reunited with Jose Felix Mourinho at Real Madrid, and Silva becomes Real Madrid's second summer signing after Real Madrid added this player in the names of Marco Corella from Chelsea for a fee of around £52 million in that perspective. So Bernardo Silva has finally signed a 2 years contract with Real Madrid. This is going to be one of the beautiful things for Team Real Madrid in that perspective. Of course, Real Madrid are already in the transfer market, and Jose Felix Mourinho, together with the club president, I'm talking about Perez, these people are doing a lot of good signings in that team of Real Madrid. Of course, they are already talked that Real Madrid are already edging closer in the services of signing Inter Milan, and Inter Milan actually wing back I'm talking about Dumfries in there. Of course, there is a huge actually said that Ibrahim Konate is also set to join the team of Real Madrid with actually Antonio Rudiger, the former Chelsea player, also extending his contract at the team until 2027. Those are some of the stories making headlines from Real Madrid. I can confirm to you that this team of Real Madrid wants to stay competitive in all cup in all cup engagements, so it still remains to be seen harder. This team will be important to make big settlements in what we call the UEFA Champions League, in the Spanish La Liga, and in other domestic cups. So it still remains to be seen whether Jose Felix Mourinho will revive Real Madrid's actual title hopes still in there. Of course, Liverpool have won the race, and they've hijacked that deal of Victor Munez from Osasuna. Of course, team Newcastle United were the front runners for his services, but I can confirm to you that Liverpool have now won the race to sign this player in the names of Victor Munez. Of course, he is a winger. He plays for Spain national in form. Actually white players, and they have been talked about a number of youngsters that this team of Liverpool has been looking for. Of course, Munez is only 22 years old. He is so quick on the ball. He has the pace, and Liverpool are saying that he is going to be a direct replacement for this player in the names of Mo Salah. Of course, they already thought that Liverpool are also interested in the services of Yan Diamante from RB Leipzig. Of course, the Moroccan is also set to join Liverpool very, very soon. But this player in the names of Victor Munez from Osasuna is finally going to be joining Liverpool, and Liverpool are going to be giving him a long-time contract. Of course, he is going to be joining Liverpool. That's because of that contract cloud that Liverpool further triggered in the, of course, he is a player who has cost Liverpool around 34.6 million pounds. That is the money that Liverpool has paid Osasuna. Of course, he is going to be the first signing that Anthony Iriola is going to be having at Liverpool. Of course, he is going to be having a team that he wants to build with the young stars, and Victor Nunes from Osasuna is now the player that Liverpool has acquired at the services, and he'll be having his medicals with Liverpool very, very soon. When you look at this player in the name of Victor Nunes, of course, he is not actually an ordinary player. He is a very, very good player. He has been into that team of Barcelona. He has been in that team of Real Madrid in their academy setups, and he finally joined Osasuna. And from Osasuna, he has now earned actually a direct move to Anfield, one of the biggest clubs in England right now. And Victor Nunes is going to be a good one for that team of Liverpool, and the project at Liverpool under Iriola is going to be huge, and there is already a huge actual issue at Liverpool with a number of their players being ruled out with the issues. And I can tell you who Ekitike is going to be out actually for a long period of time. That's because he has actually a huge injured concert. Of course, he has got a ruptured Achilles injury with him, and he's going to be a long-term absentee for Liverpool. He's going to be on the sidelines for Liverpool for a number of times. Of course, Liverpool is now looking for white players to come and back up him in that position. Of course, Marcel is leaving, and Liverpool are saying that they wanted to add a number of white players into the team. That's why they have signed the services of Victor Nunes from Osasuna, and they already talked about this player in the names of Yan Diamante from RB Leipzig. So Liverpool are in business right now. Of course, Federico Chiesa is also expected to leave Liverpool, so it still remains to be seen whether this player can be important to quit that. Of course, Liverpool are also monitoring the Bacola equal from Paris Saint-Germain. These are some of the biggest things happening right now in the world of transfers. In the, of course, in the world of the gossip column, before I call it a quit, of course, Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspur have made moves to sign Netherlands forward. I'm talking about this player in the names of Cruncesio Somerville, 24, from the Hammers. And the West Ham are saying that if any club is interested in his services, the club has to pay a fee of around 70 million pounds for his services. And yesterday, the story also came as if Manchester United wanted to sign the two pairs from New West Ham United in the names of Martin Fernandez and Cruncesio Somerville. So it still remains to be seen whether Manchester United can be important to sign these two players. But already Tottenham Hotspur have entered the race to sign the Netherlands winger in the names of Cruncesio Somerville, 24, and it's going to be a huge one for this player. And West Ham United to decide whether this player needed to quit them and go for a greener pasture. In the Chelsea are monitoring the 26-year-old Porto goalkeeper in the names of Diego Costa, and they are saying that they are actually exploring a move for the 51 million pounds rated Portugal goalkeeper. Chelsea has suffered in the recent days for goalkeepers. Chelsea have changed goalkeepers over goalkeepers. They signed this player in the names of Mendes. They changed him. Roberto Sanchez is into the team. They say he's into there. He's having actually a mixed dilemma. We have got Philip Jorgensen into the team of Chelsea. There's a very huge dilemma of a goalkeeping error at Chelsea Football Club. So they are saying that they wanted to have another one in the name of Diego Costa, who plays for Portugal in the World Cup so far. And the only successful goalkeeper in the team of Chelsea has been this one who calls himself what do you call it him? His name that skip off my mind. Kepa Arrizabalaga was in that team, and that one was equal. I think Seskas Oho, but his name that skip off my mind a little bit. But he was the hero at that team of Chelsea. He was a fantastic actually goalkeeper for Team Chelsea Football Club in there. Chelsea are now looking for more options at the goal, and they wanted a complete goalkeeper, a goalkeeper who is a ball-playing goalkeeper, a goalkeeper who has got that shouting power of the defender, a goalkeeper who is composed enough with the ball. And Chelsea are saying that they wanted to sign this player in the names of Diego Costa. And Team Porto are saying if any team is interested in his services, the team has to pay around 51 million pounds for his services in that Pacific. Of Chelsea are also interested in signing Italy fullback. I'm talking about Andrea Combesto from Juventus, and Senegal are saying that I could offer Senegal striker Nicolas Jackson in part of that deal. Of course, they are saying that they wanted Andre Combesso as a direct replacement for Marco Correa, who has crossed over to Team Real Madrid, and they are saying that they are ready to offer Nicolas Jackson in a swap move for this deal. I think this could be something which could be very good. Of course, at Team Chelsea Football Club, Nicolas Jackson could be one of the most weightiful players in that team of Chelsea Football Club. Of course, we have seen Chelsea adding a number of players in that team. Of course, they signed this player. They have got a striker who is in that team. He is in there. I think Chelsea, with the striking force, they are good to go. And Nicolas Jackson could be one of the players who could be surplus to requirement at Chelsea Football Club. But I think if he goes to Juventus, if he goes to Italy, that's where this guy in the name of Nicolas Jackson can be important to have an excellent player at that team of Juventus. Of course, there will be no much competition in that team of Juventus. Of course, Real Madrid bid for Atletico Madrid, that's where Argentina striker Julian Alvarez 26 was actually a phantom offer where the Bayern Munich is actually Michael Olise, their top target, and Real remain hopeful of signing the 24-year-old France winger. This is according to Mundo Deportivo down in Spain. And then Manchester United have no plans to negotiate a new loan agreement with Barcelona for their forward. I'm talking about Marcus Rashford. And Manchester United said if any club is interested in the services of Marcus Rashford, the club has to pay a fee of around £40 million, apart from Liverpool and Manchester City. So any club apart from those two can be important to sign this player in the name of Marcus Rashford. This is according to ESPN. Then Tottenham Hotspur have turned down a second bid from Brighton, offer £35 million for their Croatia, center back. I'm talking about Luka Vasquez, who spent last season on loan at Hamburg. These are some of the stories that are making headlines in the Tottenham Hotspur open talks over a deal to sign the German under 21 forward Said El Mala from Cologne and hope to beat Newcastle United and Nottingham Forest for the 19-year-old. Xavi says. In the, of course, Lazio and Feyenoord are both monitoring the future of Manchester City's 28-year-old English midfielder Charlie Gray. Of course, saying that they wanted this player in that perspective. Of course, Gokhama FC have agreed terms with a 2-year-old Austria forward Sam Kerr, and they are saying that they wanted this player to join them very soon. Of course, he is a free agent after leaving Women's Super League side Chelsea Football Club. This is according to ESPN. My time is up. I need to leave the studio for the next program to come in. Bye bye for now.